Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Reduce Accidents by 30 to 60%, presented by Netrodyne. I'm Lauren Fletcher, VP of Content here at Bobbit, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Before we jump in, I do encourage you to ask questions during the webinar at any point, and we will try to address them all. However, if we don't get to yours, you will be contacted by email after the event is over. I'm joined today by our speaker, Adam Kahn, Chief Business Development Officer for Netrodyne. Adam, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me be part of this panel.
Well, why don't we go ahead and have you tell us a little bit more about yourself and just go ahead and jump right on in.
Yeah, so already introduced Adam Kahn. I have many titles at Netrodyne. We are an 8 or 9 year old startup now. I guess we're not a startup anymore. We have about 800 people globally, servicing a dozen or so countries, deployments in North America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, India. And so before we knew it, we're a global company, a couple 100,000 units deployed, a couple thousand great customers that use our product. And I would tell you that me at Netrodyne, I'm a single-digit employee, so I've been here almost from the first studio office to now we have offices in San Diego and San Francisco and Bangalore, India, soon to have something on the East Coast. So it's super exciting to see the success that we've had with the company. And one of the things that I really think is a core fundamental of the success is our focus on the driver and not necessarily focusing on the driver in a negative way, because my experience in the industry, I have almost 30 years in the safety telematics side of the business. And I would tell you that, for the last, the first 20 years of my career, safety has always been, well, let's find the worst driver and get them out. And I think that model is flawed. One, because there's not necessarily a line of drivers who are standing outside your office wanting to work with you. Finding a qualified driver that fits your culture, it's a little tricky. And then second, I just feel like it goes against human nature, right? So people generally respond to positive praise versus negative influence. And so I think as we talk about this topic, 30, 40, 50, 60% in reducing your accidents, it's all very possible, right? And I've seen it. We have plenty of customers that have achieved that success. But what the fundamentals or the tenets of that, what I always advise on is that it's easier to motivate a workforce around positive goals than scaring them straight. Like walking through a doorway together is always better than pulling someone through the doorway. So, I think one of the things that we'll really talk about in this conversation here is you can hit these results, but it takes a little bit of work. And the main piece is driver engagement, driver recognition, and making sure that along the way you are reinforcing your message versus punishing people for not hitting goals. And it's the ultimate carrot versus the stick scenario. So let's jump into it. And one of the first things I always think about ROI, and I'm really excited about this modeling, mainly because it is based upon a couple of very practical, pragmatic research studies that we've done with existing customers. And the pitfall of a lot of ROIs, and I've participated in some of these, is where you sit in a room and you say, hey, I think we want our product to show a 40% ROI. And then you come up with some smoke and mirrors and you say, oh, well, I'm going to add this and add this and add this. And all of a sudden you get to the number and you go to your prospect or your customer and you show it to them and they don't believe it. So it's a repeatable piece. And the modeling that we've done is we actually looked internal about how actual customers are improving and we harness that improvement in terms of this modeling. So the first thing that I kind of really would advise is you follow the money, right? So, and I usually call this dead money, right? So I've had many conversations with fleets where they just don't have the ability to reconcile or defend an event. And I think video telematics does a great job in that space. It starts to tell, I call it the third story, right? You have what one person saw, what another person saw, and then the video kind of gives you an unbiased view of what really happened. But without that, you have these big verdicts that maybe get assigned to you, and the money is real. And if you're in commercial trucking or your commercial transportation, there's plenty of billboards out there. This is a picture I took in El Paso. This is an actual billboard outside one of our customers' locations. Hit by a truck, call Chuck. And the plaintiff attorneys are pretty aggressive, right? When they want to win, they'll find a way to go win. And so it's really on us, the fleets, to start doing the right type of, up, kind of bumping up our game a little bit on how to defend against the plaintiff attorneys. But an example, when you follow the money, and this is from I believe it's from an ATRI study, where it talked about, let's just use asleep at the wheel. Average verdict, $500,000. All right, well, $500,000 is not a nominal check to cut, but the recovery of that, if you're a business that is 10 to 15% margin business, and in transportation, commercial transportation, that's a pretty healthy business. A $500,000 verdict takes over $3 million to recover in additional revenue. So it's not necessarily the verdict that hurts you; it's the recovery also, right? So there's hard dollars and soft dollars that you really have to think about. And when I think about how much dead money, and I've had these conversations with fleets where, I'll ask them about their budgeting, and they say, well, we put $2 million into a miscellaneous fund because that's about what we have to pay out every year for claims that we can't defend. So the first thought process would be let's manifest, right? Let's manifest what that opportunity would look like. What would, if I had $2 million, where could I spend that money and not pay out to plaintiff attorneys that I can't defend? I could get some new vehicles. I can improve driver facilities, driver retention awards, new software. I can go bid new business. There's a lot of things that, that money can be spent for that actually grows your revenue versus, it being a dead, line item on your accounting statements that is just a dead, dead line item. So I like having this vision, because when you start to get your team excited and you go talk to the drivers and you say, hey, we are all in this project together. We are going to reduce accidents, because if we can reduce accidents by X, we can put that money into a new gym for the drivers, or we can get 5 new Freightliner Cascadias or Internationals or Volvos or whatever you want that might get 3 or 4 miles per gallon better fuel economy. And all these things are great. But I think it is when you share that vision with the whole team, it becomes very transparent and people can really get excited about your investments. So one of the things is this is where I think technology really steps in and starts to help, because without having technology, you're kind of blind to some of the things that happen. I think video telematics and Netrodyne has a great set of products called Driver Eye. They do some really wonderful things about creating exposure, having messaging to the driver, engaging the driver, and so on. But all these things are, I think, really important, because when you're going against an aggressive plaintiff attorney who's now refining their tactics about how to win, part of that, and I'm going to talk about this later in the presentation, I call it the new ask. And the new ask essentially says you need to engage your drivers on a much more frequent basis than ever before. And the old model, you really had the ability where you get everyone together once a month, once a quarter, throw a couple pizzas on the table, talk about safety. Everyone walks out, they feel energized, and then 3 or 4 days later, they go back to their old habits. Plaintiff attorneys love that because then they look at that and say, well, you're not very attentive, and we might even tell you that your safety culture is negligent because you don't talk to your drivers enough. But if your drivers aren't coming back to the office or the terminal or the DC every day, it's hard, right? It's hard to go talk to every driver every day. That means you either got to bump up your safety department to have 5 or 6 more safety managers. That's a challenge. Or you need to figure out a better way to talk to your drivers. What we're suggesting is technology helps here, where I can share information on a much more frequent basis with drivers than I ever could. They can start to self-coach, and we can put that into the mechanism to reduce the claim of negligence. But one of the things I think is really important here, and I talked about walking together through a doorway where you're a team and you're engaged together versus telling somebody what not to do. And I'm gonna cite some research that was started about 100 years ago, and the research was done by Dr. Heinrich, and he essentially did this research for about 75 or 80,000 workers, and came back to the conclusion that said if you do a large amount of unsafe acts, so not wearing safety glasses, eventually something's going to go into your eye and cause a major injury. Well, as we sit here, it seems very intuitive that, like, if you don't wear safety equipment, you're probably something bad's going to happen. But somebody had to come up with the research to kind of like quantify it. 50 years later, another researcher came back, kind of did the same study, used a much larger population, and the big reveal was instead of having 3 bands, they went to 5 bands, right? So came almost to the same conclusion. I might suggest that we rethink this. And in that yellow band, it says unsafe acts. An unsafe act, I'm going to use it as an example of distracted driving. And I might have a driver who's got 10 distracted driving events, and I sit down with that driver and I say, hey, this is really bad. If you keep this up, something bad's going to, even worse is going to happen, and nobody wants that. Let's work together and try to reduce that by 50%. Well, and that's very monumental, right? 50% reduction seems awesome. Like, if I had a 50% reduction in my spend at my household, I'd be delighted. But think about what I'm still leaving on the table. If I'm telling the driver, hey, I'd like you to go 10 to 5, am I really still okay with 5? Not really, right? So I think the premise would be to start looking at data a different way, and not necessarily saying how many times are you doing something wrong versus how often are you doing it right. And so I think there should be another notation that my advice to fleet managers, to safety managers, is start looking holistically at the entire body of work versus the moments that are maybe problematic. So the example here is start tracking out of all the hours that you're driving, how many hours are you actually driving where you're distraction free? So that's a much easier thing to get people motivated around, right? So again, walking through the doorway together versus pulling someone. If you celebrate the compliance and you say, hey, look, 99% of your day, you're not even touching your phone. Can you go to 99.5%? Those types of KPIs are also very good team-based goals, right? So a team-based goal like this, where you try to get the whole organization above 99% distraction-free driving, you start to get peer influence, right? Other drivers are motivating other drivers and teaching them best practices versus that manager to driver one-on-one relationship. So I think I would suggest that in the building of this business case of reducing accidents up to 60%, start celebrating the safe acts and the proactive maneuvers, because that gives you evidence of success that your drivers are engaged. So let's build this business case, and I want to use data. And in the business case that I'm thinking about, there are a lot of things that are hard dollars, and there's things that are soft dollars. Hard dollars, reduction of accidents, right? I know how much an accident costs. I know how much if I get sideswiped or I take out a canopy or I hit another car or a car hits me, how much it costs to replace a front fender, a side fairing or whatever. All those things are hard costs. Soft costs are like brand reputation, driver, satisfaction, all those other things I think are icing on the cake, but I really want to talk about the cake, right? So when I think about a business case, one of the things that we do here at Netrodyne is we have a scoring measurement that's pretty comprehensive. And I did talk about, having visibility into all the work versus just the bad work, right? So this is really important. And we developed a scoring mechanism. We call it the green zone score. And we call it the green zone score in the premise that we want to track how often the driver is actually doing what they're supposed to do versus only tracking when the driver's not doing what they're supposed to do. Again, that's a carrot versus a stick mentality, right? So I want to measure the entire body of work. And here's an interesting stat. For a long haul trucker who travels, let's say 80,000 miles a year, they drive about 300 to 400 minutes per day. I would suggest that it's probably wise for you to know what happens in all 300 to 400 minutes a day. So one of the things I would ask your vendors is how much data do you collect? And don't be scared of the data, because what I found is in a lot of cases, 95, 98% of the time, the driver's doing everything you've asked them to do, which is great confirmation, right? And that actually can be used to help defend your fleet in court, where you're starting to say, hey, I want to show you how great my drivers are. I got all of my drivers who 98% of the time, they're doing everything I want them to do. And I have proof, right? So that's a very powerful thing to be able to prove the good versus just saying in absence of bad, I think they're good, right? So those are different mentalities, carrot versus the stick. Now, the green zone score that we developed actually has the ability to have some layers to it, right? So every driver has a score. And then if that driver's in a group, that group has a score. If the driver's in a district, a region, a super region, and then corporate. So the score actually travels up and down the organization, where a fleet can look at the score and go, wow, I had a 5% drop in score. They can actually mine the data and figure out which driver actually was causing the influx of the data to be changed. Now, I'll give you an example. We worked with a large retailer, and during the December holiday period, we saw their score drop, probably 5-10%. And what we found is when we dug into the data was they were so busy, they had I call it more supervisors driving routes, and the supervisors who, not familiar with the route, trying to fill in for capacity, were actually the ones causing the biggest disruptions to score. They were able to sort of adjust and kind of manage that resource. So having visibility on where the score is, I think it's important. So the next piece, I think, is to understand what you're tracking. And if you're a DOT fleet, a lot of your accidents are, if there's an ambulance on the scene or a tow truck on the scene, you have to report those, right? It's they go to the FMCSA, they get put on a portal, they become public record. Public record now is discoverable by plaintiff attorneys. So, that's something you really want to manage. And what we found was, in my personal, I've seen that on the reportables, it's about a third of the accidents tend to be call it injury. And I never really think about fatalities because I think it's, when you're doing your business case, I think it's very dark to say, well, you killed, your events caused 3 lives to be lost last year. And if you only, had one event this year, you'd pay for the system. That's not the right way to think about this. But it is important to understand what your numbers are, right? How do you measure where you start, right? So if these are the accidents that you're really looking at, the next thing to think about is how do I measure that? And a common way to measure this is an acronym here that's APMM, or accidents per million miles. Now, the formula is not very difficult to assemble. It's essentially the number of accidents divided by your annual mileage divided by a million, right? So in this case, I have a case study, an example. I have a fleet that has 67 million miles. They had 35 accidents over the last 12 months and a number of, I call it non-reportable accidents. So 27 plus 8, that's 35 divided by 67 million divided by a million. Your reportable accidents per million mile is 0.518. So I think that's important to track. You can't track improvement unless you know where you started. If you're trying to lose weight, that first day you step on the scale, it's the scariest day, but you have to have a starting point, right? So figure out what your numbers are today so you can really start to track, am I headed in the right way? Now, what we saw, we've actually did a study, and this is one of the first tenets that I talked about earlier about building this business case. We looked at, we took 6 months from last year. We looked at over 200,000 drivers, which is a billion miles of driving, a billion plus minutes of driving. So, it's a fairly large data set. And in the cases where those drivers, anytime they had an accident, and I'm only talking about, in this case, a preventable accident, right? So non-preventable accidents, I think, you got to leave those to the side because although they create some exposure, the liability is not as great as a preventable accident. But what we did in this study is any time that one of those drivers in the study had an accident, we essentially lined up buckets and we said, this driver had an accident. His score was 650. So I put one marker in that 650 bucket, and then another accident happened and that driver's score was 700, and so on and so on. But as you can imagine, the predicted result happened, right? So there was more accidents that happened with lower scores. And in our measurement, our scoring goes from 0 to 1,000. It's kind of like a credit score. The higher it is, the better. But in this case, we saw, the larger amount of accidents happened when the score was low, which is actually ironic to that Heinrich triangle that we said the more unsafe acts you have actually causes more, larger events. So we kind of proved out the Heinrich triangle, saying, yes, it's accurate. Unsafe acts equal bad things that happen. Now, but the outcome that we got from this study was essentially a accident correlation slope, or a curve. And this curve is really interesting. And we have 2 curves. One on the left is for more long haul driving, and the one on the right is more for last mile delivery. The difference between these 2 types of driving conditions, the one on the left, a Class 8 tractor trailer, the number of accidents is actually less, but the severity is much higher, right? You take a Class 8 tractor trailer and it tips over on the highway, putting freight all over the highway. You're closing down the highway, and it's pretty expensive. On the last mile arena, the number of accidents are probably a little higher, but the severity is a lot lower. So you might have a box truck that's delivering goods to, office supplies to your office, and they take out a concrete wall, or they hit an awning, or, they crush a curb. Those are all dollar amounts, but it's not as bad as taking your truck upside down on a highway. So the outcome of this is that we now know that for every, I'm going to use the right-hand side, the last mile, for every 50 points that the green zone score goes up, we see about a 19 to 22% reduction in accidents per million miles, right? So, all right, the question is, how do I get to 50, 60%? Well, the quick answer is you make sure that your green zone score or your performance score goes up, right? Unsafe acts, safe acts versus unsafe acts, right? So I want my drivers to do more good than bad. And if they do more good, then the statistical probability of something bad happening goes down. But now we know a quantifiable number against that, right? So now I know that if you go up 50 points, 100 points, 150 points, I can start to build out what the expected result is. So looking at drivers, at fleets, we see like where we can track the performance. And this is really what you want to see. You want to see this bottom to top, this left to right action where your slope is going up and you're showing improvement. And again, measure, where you start and measure where you're at. Now, the piece that is interesting on this green zone score or this slope here is that I can also overlay, I call it leading indicators of risk. So this red line in this case, it measures severe alerts per 1,000 minutes. So what is a severe alert? Going through a stop sign without stopping, going through a red light, excessive speeding, driving, with your phone stuck to your ear. These all have pretty good correlation to accidents, as you can imagine, right? And now what we found was another statistic that we found. So now we know when green zone scores go up by 50 points, I get a reduction in accidents per million miles. The other piece that I found was on the leading indicator side, for every 5 points that the green zone score goes up, I have a 5% reduction in severe risk KPIs. So now I know I have this constant of this green zone score, and I know if it goes up on a day-to-day basis, that means risk is being taken out of the organization. And if it goes up, I know my accidents are going down. So I now have a now measurement, and then I call it a next measurement. So having this constant indicator of performance, I think that covers all of your driving, the good, the bad, the ugly, the great. I think it's really important because you can use that as a statistical pivot to reducing leading indicators and lagging indicators. And I talk in this space because I think these are all important. You cannot drink the ocean by one big gulp. You have to take sip, 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 sip. Just like you can't eat an elephant with one bite, right? You have to take bite by bite. So if you can reduce your leading indicators, you're going to have a great outcome on the lagging indicators, right? You can't only focus on, hey, I'm going to dispatch you today. Just don't get into an accident, but do whatever you want, right? I think there's management on the front end and the management on the back end. So the other piece that we looked at, so now I have this basis for what happens when the green zone goes up and goes down. Well, that still doesn't help me build out a model. What I wanted to look at, and we looked at two different studies, I looked at one study that had 100 driver eye customers and another study that had 50 driver eye customers, and I just wanted to see what that first year journey looked like. And what I found out was that typically in our customer driver eye community, we see somewhere between 125 to 150 point improvement in the first year. That's fantastic because now I have evidence of success from 150 plus customers. I'm going to use the marker of 150 point improvement because it's just easier for math. And I have my other data element that says for every 50 points that I increase my green zone score, I get 19 points off of my accidents per million mile. Well, now if you're telling me I went 150 points, it's 19 times 19 times 19, that's somewhere in that 30 to 40% reduction of accidents. I'm halfway there. We talked about 60%, but I'm halfway there in the first year, which is fantastic. Now, I will tell you that none of this comes for free. There is some work, and the more work that you put into this activity, the more results. And the curve of fleets kind of looks like this line, this graph here, where the first year I get that nice little bump, and then I get incremental bumps every year after that. Now, I'm not getting 150 points every year, because at some point, you just can't stack that much. You're going to exceed the maximum score. But what we see that, I'm going to call this in two phases of deployment. The first phase is you go from having no visibility to learning about where your risk spots are, right? I didn't know we had such a speeding problem. I didn't know we had such a following distance problem. I didn't know my drivers were driving distracted like they are, right? So having knowledge of where to focus, I think, is really important. And then the big improvement is really the didn't knows. And I'll share a story. I was in visiting one of our customers, and he asked me if I wanted to sit in on a driver coaching session. And I told him no 4 times, and he said, nah, just sit there and just listen and watch. You'll have some fun. And he brought this driver in. I think the driver had been driving for him for 15 years. And he showed him a couple videos of the driver coming down a hill, following too close. And the driver looked at the video and said, wow, that guy's going to get into an accident if he keeps driving like that. The fleet manager looked at him and said, well, that's you. And he goes, oh my gosh, I didn't know, right? So the didn't knows are a real thing. And creating exposure and sharing that information, like I didn't know how many stoplights or stop signs I rolled through until I started measuring it. I didn't know how close I was following cars on a personal basis until I started measuring it. So having the visibility into the didn't knows is a big deal. But the follow-up on this is, so now I've created this vacuum of I removed bad behavior. Now, what do I want to fill it up with, right? If I don't fill it up with anything, it's going to fill up with bad behavior over time. So what I want to do is fill up that vacuum with good driver recognition. So the most powerful thing that you can do, and I talked about team-based KPIs, right? Instead of looking at the number of times that you drive distracted, how about we look at the amount of time that you're driving not distracted and make that a team-based goal? If you have a team-based goal, not only are you going to be coached by your manager, but I'll tell you that you'll be coached by your peers, because the moment that your peers are dependent upon your performance for a bonus, they're gonna share some good ideas with you, right? And that's really what the optimal scenarios, where your drivers are actually taking over your safety culture, and you're sitting there as a safety manager along for the ride. That's where you get sustained benefit and you get this incremental gains, because even a brand new driver who walks into a new safety culture like that is going to be mentored, in the right way to drive for your fleet versus, how they just came out of driving school, or, the old habits they had with another fleet. So I think these are really important in the sense of, again, transparency and engagement about the commonality of the goal. I would tell you that, if you want, you can email me. I have a whole library of articles that I've saved on my computer. If you don't want to email me, the Google machine is really powerful, or ChatGPT is really powerful. If you just type in research around driver recognition or employee recognition, Harvard Business Review, I think, probably has a third of their articles focused on this subject. So plenty of research out there. And it seems very intuitive that, employees who want to work at a company do better work than employees who are upset at that company, right? So that's the bottom line. Now, I would tell you that one of the things that we've learned is that you have to find ways to motivate and celebrate good success along the way. Because if you just have a program that primarily only says do less bad things, eventually you're going to run out of that, or you're going to grow tired of that, right? So one of the things that we did to kind of, I call it, fill that void, where I took out bad behavior, but now I want to fill it with something. So we have a couple different driving events, and this is really interesting in terms of some video telematics, where the system itself can actually dictate and tell you where you're doing really positive things. So one example is a driving, we call these driver stars. One of the examples here is you're driving in the right-hand lane, you're at speed, somebody cuts you off, and now your following distance is jeopardized. And you as the driver, you come off the throttle and you create some space. The system actually recognizes that and rewards the driver, because that's very proactive, safe driving. And I want to capture that, and I want to share that with the driver to motivate them and reinforce that good driving. The other driver stars that we have, I think, are now, instead of waiting for that moment where something scary happens on the road and driver does something well, why not look at a body of work and say, over this period of time, you excelled at this one driving pattern. I will share my story. I have a video camera in my car, and we have a driver star that is made available to drivers when they have 75 stops in a row. They get recognized and they get a bonus to their score. I have one in my car. I said, hey, I want to go see if I can't get a driver star, and I hit it. I got it. I got my driver star, 75 stops in a row. I survived my family yelling at me, telling me to go through stop signs. But I was pretty militant of, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, look both ways, and then go. Ironically, if I was to observe my driving coming in today, and I wasn't even thinking about driver stars, my standard behavior now is every stop sign I stop at, it's 3 seconds. So that recognition actually changed my behavior, right? Because it was enough time where I repeated. And it's not just a one-off, but it's, over time, where I've demonstrated that now this is a new driving behavior. Pretty interesting. I can certainly share my experiences in this space. I love this quote from Benjamin Franklin: tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and learn. Right? I think this is a really powerful statement in terms of this approach. So let's talk about a little bit of some of the nuances. I did talk about the new ask, and the new ask is really set up where you start using technology as a benefit. And one of the things in the new ask is you need to involve drivers more frequently than just a weekly face-to-face or monthly or quarterly meeting. So technology steps in now where I can start to automate information and send it to the driver almost in real time. The first one that I think is really interesting is systems are getting smarter where they analyze the data at the device. And because the analysis is done at the device, I can now create workflow immediately. So my system sees that I'm following too close. I create a message to the driver, please create space. The driver hears the audio and says, oh, you're right, I am too close. I come off the throttle. I've self-corrected right away, right? It's that act now, talk later mentality of how do I change the driver as quickly as possible into a good driving state versus maybe a lazy or a non-reactive driver state. The other one is being able to share information over email or through a mobile app when the driver's not driving, and be able to, throughout the day, say, hey, here's how your score is fluctuating. And the reason your score is fluctuating is because these driving conditions or these driving performance. And if you change your driving performance, here's where your score might land. And so the driver, I think the number one reason drivers call into dispatch is, how am I doing against plan? Am I going to make my bonus this month? Right? So now I've automated that, which I think these are all, that stack that I talked about. How do I get there? Having automation and technology certainly accelerates moving you from that 30% now to the 40%, now to the 50%. So let's recap real quick. Average customer, about 150 points. On the front end, for every 5 point that I see on the green zone going up, I get about I said 5%. I've seen studies go as high as 9%. On the back end, for the long haul trucking, it's 14 to 16%. For the last mile, it's 19 to 22%. But I start to have these bases for now I can really develop a model. And what I can start doing is start doing the computation. Now, the gray line here, the history of video telematics, the first set of cameras that came out were essentially crash recorders. You had a crash. It did a wonderful job of memorializing 12 to 15 seconds around that crash. And you just had a better set of evidence or leveling to be able to say what happened. Well, again, plaintiff attorneys have changed their focus. Now they're looking at the safety culture and not the event. How often do you engage drivers and advise them and coach them and so on? So the old model of buying a crash recorder, still very good for knowing what happened when a crash, but it won't get you to that 60%. I've seen results there where they do 20 to 25% over 5 years, which is great. Right. But if I had to choose between 25% reduction or 60% reduction, right, I hope everyone's raising their hand saying, I like 60%. So we can start forecasting kind of where you're going to go and what the accidents per million mile. And of course, every company is in sales. But if you're ever interested and you say, Adam, I just want to kind of see what the projection would be on my company, but I don't really want a sales pitch, send me a note and I can take your data and I can run it through our model and share it with you just so you can have a baseline. And I welcome everybody to do that because ultimately, if we can create a safer roads, better, it's better for everyone. So let me show you kind of a quick case study on one of our customers. This particular customer is in the Southwest, a couple hundred Class 8 tractor trailers, pretty good regional carrier, hyper focused on fuel economy. I mean, they have bulletin boards in their driver lounge where it's incredible. I think every quarter they give away they used to give away a Harley, but not everyone likes motorcycles. So now they give away a Jeep. They give a Jeep Wrangler every quarter to the driver who has the highest fuel economy at this fleet. So they're very, very focused on, efficiency. So when we started rolling out with this customer, we saw their green zone score in the mid 700s, and it shot up about 100 points, within 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months. So right on track, right? So that 125 to 150 in the first year, they're right on track. But you see that red line, which is the severe alerts going down. And this is really hyper focus on, hey, I want put down the phone, anticipate a stale yellow, try not to, hop on the brake, anticipate, events as they happen, stop signs, speeding, stuff like that. It doesn't happen just because you say do less accidents, get in less crashes. You have to do the work. So when we measured this fleet, and again, I talked about knowing where you started and what your trends are, you can see that this fleet had a legacy crash recorder, really good for identifying and providing visibility into crashes, not very good for changing the safety culture. And you can kind of see this because the actual crashes were going up, right? So the accidents per million mile was going from 0.3 all the way to 0.5. That's a pretty steep increase over a year. Now they made a fundamental decision to change to now, I'll call it a system that is more interactive, looks at the complete data set. It changes their visibility into what they can see and how they can actually recognize good driving. Check out what the next year looked like, right? 0.5 all the way down to 0.2. That's almost a 50% reduction in accidents per million mile in 1 year. So again, this is a fleet in the Southwest. If you're interested and you are saying, hey, Adam, I'd like to talk to this fleet, drop me a note and I can certainly arrange a conversation with their safety manager. He's wonderful. They've actually changed their insurance model from going from an insurance model to a captive to now self-insured because of their confidence in their safety program. So the other piece I think that's interesting here is what is a reduction from 0.54 to 0.27? Well, just looking at that number for this particular fleet, it's almost $4 million. You know what $4 million was, right? Previous, that was dead money, right? So dead money is now recovered by the fleet and is being reinvested into different entities of the fleet to make them more productive. So in this case alone, I showed a 50% reduction. I'm so anxious to see what this next quarter looks like because I actually think this fleet could be in the 0.2s pretty soon, where without a lot of work, switching programs and activating in-cab messaging, sharing information, having a common goal, and communicating to the drivers of why we're doing this and celebrating success along the way. All those are really key fundamentals to get to this level here. And then I think, again, I talked earlier about, eating an elephant. You don't do it with one big gulp, one big gulp. You do it with tiny bites. You can't swallow the ocean in one big gulp. You have to take little sips. So a little progress each day adds up, right? It adds up. So, hey, put down the phone, increase your following distance a little bit, speeding, slow down a little bit or be at speed. All these things matter and you can track them. And if I can track them, then they actually have this nice ripple effect where like the multiplier, even, starts to magnify and expand your results on the back end. So I know that we got about 10 minutes left here. I did take some breaths when I was talking, so don't worry about me suffocating and talking as much as I did. You can tell I'm fairly passionate about this. I am 100% out there to share. So again, if somebody's interested in saying, hey, here's my numbers, just run me the numbers. I don't want a sales pitch. I'd be glad to do it, right? I'd be glad to share the information with you and kind of get you at least a baseline of where you're at and give you a couple pointers on what's worked with other fleets of how to get to that 60%. Because I do think it's very possible. But to some degree, it's maybe shifting your organization from this view to that view, right? You have to do a little bit of pivoting to have a positive mindset versus the negative mindset. Not as easy as it sounds or I'm making it sound, but I've seen great results, and I think it's very, very doable for everybody. So, Lauren, I think we have a couple questions. We can maybe go to, I see 2 or 3 on here, and we got a couple minutes, so maybe we can go from there.
Yeah, we've got a bit of time remaining. So just a reminder, if you do have any questions and we're just caught up in listening, you still have a chance to drop those questions in. If we don't get to your question, we will email you back. So drop them all in and we will go ahead and get to that. So we're going to go ahead and go to the first question that I've got down here for you.
Yeah. I'm going to just address the fourth question on here.
Yeah, go for it.
Are we going to get a copy of the presentation? I think there's some ability for everyone to get a copy of the presentation. And Lauren, please share my email on that if you'd like. And again, if anyone has questions, please drop me a note, and I'd be glad to talk with you and learn about your program and maybe share some good successes. So I see that Mike Brust had that statement on there. So Mike, there should be a copy of the presentation with my contact information. But let's go to the first three here.
Yeah, no, not a problem. And that's correct. So what type of an impact have you seen on insurance? I think that's going to be really top of mind for a lot of folks right now.
Yeah, insurance is, the insurance companies are a little slower to change than, technology. Working here at a startup, we call it startup speed, and, everything goes really fast. The insurance companies, they're very methodical, and they work through their modeling and all that. I've seen two things. One is fleets that have implemented safety programs and shown results have certainly slowed the increase of their premiums or kept it at the same rates. I don't know if there are a lot of opportunities where somebody's lowering their insurance rates anymore. But the best scenario where you can keep your costs the same or just slow the increase, I think it's really good. The other thing that I've seen from insurance companies is there is evidence that they're embracing this type of technology. We work with probably 30 or 40 different insurance companies, and I am very aware that there's a number of insurance companies that will offer subsidies to purchasing this type of equipment. So I've seen some insurance companies go between 25 to 50 to 100% of the cost of subsidizing this type of technology. So I think over the next couple of years, two things will happen. Insurance companies will get more data and feel more confident about the results. And then hopefully there might be a little bit of tort reform that happens about controlling some of the plaintiff attorneys, which stabilizes the cost to the insurance company, where they start feeling more comfortable about factoring in this type of technology into your premiums.
Love it. I think that was really helpful. All right. We do have another one in here. Adam, I know you can see those questions. We got number 5 down here. Do you think you can speak to that?
What type of safety plan can help us with insurance rate by the time of renewal? So I think there are, if you can show, I think the leading and lagging indicators, the measurement of leading and lagging indicators are really important, right? So showing that your accident rate went down, I think that's really important. And then the details of how you got there, I think, are even more important, right? So being able to provide where the the leading indicators of risk are gone down, right? So instead of just saying my accidents went down by 30%, I think it's more important to say we've built a solid program, a foundation of safety where I know that 30% will never go the other way, because my drivers are slowing down and they're stopping and they're negotiating stale yellows in a better way, and they're not driving distracted. So having that evidence of how you got to that number, I think, is even more important than the final resultant number, right? Saying, how did we get there and how do we change our culture, gives insurance companies a lot of confidence to say, oh, you've shifted your focus, you've shifted how you start to measure. Instead of just reducing bad, you're trying to do more good. And I think that will have a massive impact in the conversation with insurance companies. And I think this modeling I'm talking about, I think it transcends any fleet size, right? So every fleet, even the fleet that, at the next trade show you go to and they give the big trophy to the safest fleet in the segment, they still have accidents, right? They still aren't in court. They're just going to court a lot less than everyone else, right? And they're actually like neutralizing the decisions in court. So again, having the detail of how you got there, I think, is really going to be a huge factor in establishing that great relationship with your insurance carrier and your brokers.
Thanks, Adam. All right, we still got a couple of minutes left, so I've got another one here for you, and I think this is going to be really important. There's so much data in so much of what we do. How are fleet managers managing all that extra data that the driver system is collecting?
Yeah, so one of the things we really think about that, right? So the first thing, because I'm pushing out data through in-cab messaging and through the mobile app, I wouldn't think about the data as every data element is having an action associated with it, right? So one of the things that we really manage, again, is I call it driver trends. So if the driver started to use his cell phone and I can actually send messaging to reduce that, then I've kind of eliminated any future coaching on that data. The extra data certainly provides context. I would tell you that any program that you deploy, any information that you get, you probably should be very purposeful of what you do with that data, because the worst thing you can do is buy a program, implement it, and ignore it, and then all of a sudden somebody says, you have all this great technology and you're not using it, you're negligent, right? You never want to be claimed as negligent, and I think that's an important one. And but I think some of it is using the automation feature of the product where you're really managing the edges. If I can ask someone to slow down, I can give 2 or 3, I can coach them on it. And then if I still have that driver that needs that extra conversation, I might bring them in, right, to have a face-to-face. So your face-to-face conversations actually go down because they're only the edges. But in that same context, I wouldn't tell you that you have less work, because hopefully you have room where you bring in drivers because they're crushing it, right? And you want to celebrate them, right? So again, when I take something out of that hole or that vacuum, I want to fill it up with something. So my suggestion is to fill it up with good stuff, right? Versus just saying bad stuff went away, right? So leave room for, escalating the recognition. And I think the last piece that we covered a little bit, it doesn't matter what size fleet you are, right? So the dollar amounts just get bigger when if I have a fleet of 5,000 vehicles, that dollar amount, the exposure is a lot more money, but the statistics and the probability all stay the same, right? If you have one vehicle that travels 60,000 miles a year, it doesn't matter if it belongs with a 5-truck fleet or a 5,000 truck fleet. You have some of the same elements that you want to really track and manage. So I don't think this is, an enterprise or a large fleet only conversation. I have customers that have 5 trucks that implement this. And in fact, for a smaller fleet, the more automation that you have is the better, because you really don't have all the headcount to apply to some of these conversations. So if you can do it and leverage technology to increase your bandwidth, the better. So I think to some degree, a smaller fleet might have a little bit more protection, because you're actually you're leveraging technology as a virtual safety manager versus an actual another head that's sitting next to you that maybe is not budgeted for that year. But it looks like we're at time, Lauren. So I really, really appreciate everyone who attended. And Lauren, thank you so much for the invitation. As always, please use me as an industry resource. And thank you so much.
Yeah, no, I can't appreciate you enough. Your passion for everything you've talked about is absolutely contagious. And I do hope that everybody really enjoyed today's webinar. I want to thank you and Netrodyne again for their presentation, and remind everybody This webinar will be available on demand. You can watch it again, share it with your friends and colleagues. It'll be available online at truckinginfo.com/webinars. Thank you all so much, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Great. Thank you.